get the largest voter turnout. I think it was in like 3 years or something like that. So obviously he's very hardworking and he's willing to put in the work. And I think you all should vote for him. Thank you.
Is there any other discussions on this candidate? Director Ruiz?
Hi, so I had the pleasure of going to high school with Michael, and we actually started a club together also, kind of based around social awareness and getting people involved. So he's been at this for a very long time, and if anything, he's just grown with the kind of following that he has and the kind of skills that he's gained through that. So I would very much vote for Michael.
Any other discussions on this candidate? All right, then we'll move on to our next candidate. Can you just tell me how to pronounce your name, please? Pandian Rajaram? Okay. Please step up and present your statement.
Hi everyone. I'm the first generation international student and I'm doing Master's in Computer Science. I'm the non-citizen officer at CSSA. My top three goals are like census. I have a booklet over there, you can check it, what are things, and we do have a kind of website and pages for everywhere, like how to gain census votes, and we do have a program for training our students to be a field worker, so that people open the doors for the students instead of federal officers. And other things are like bringing awareness to what's happening on the campus. For example, resolutions, with EBTT1 or fourth year math requirement, and the presidential election. We also planning to consider everyone, even for non-voters like me and non-double students. Like we do have a kind of a card that will like says like what are the things you are like passionate about it, and what are things that you care about it, and we are trying to put and send it to big like government institutions. My achievements are I have completed I have passed a ABCG one solution to website, and it's on the action item for the next meeting. We're also working on the fourth year maths requirement as a solution. Also, I've created an app to increase the statistics of students and decrease the food insecurity to get the more increase the more student traffic. And one of the best candidates is like within a year I came to USA, I've been like achieved a lot from the leadership courses, and I joined a CSSA and went to CLE 2019 in Florida. And apart from that, what I'm bringing to the CSSA is I'll be the hub for every other candidates. Like
thank you. That is time. We'll now move on to questions. Is there any questions for this candidate? Director Hunter.
For the campuses that don't, for the campuses that don't have a lobby corps, what actions will you do in order to help us establish one with the right intentions?
I honestly don't know every campus because it's my first year in USA. I've already contacted like 6 to 7 campuses around today when I came here. I do have I'm going to send the resolution for the ABTT1 and the math requirements. I'm also contacting everyone. I believe like this is my first year. I don't know many things about here, but I'm very passionate about civic engagement. So you can see my achievement like within a year and here. In a couple of months, I've passed the resolution, and within a couple of days, a couple of hours, I've engaged with almost like I think like 7 to 8 campuses. I do have the contact numbers, and I'm trying to engage with everyone. That's my role.
Any other questions for this candidate? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there any discussion? Director Wong?
I'd just like to say, based on the candidate's statement, I do admire that he already has his 3 goals set that he's planning on doing for the incoming year. I think it's really important to have a set of plan when you're coming into these positions. So I think he would do a great job in his position.
Director Rivera Jimenez?
Yeah. So I just want to say that Daniel is a really hardworking individual. Getting to work with him for a short amount of time, I've seen and he communicates and he's really passionate about increasing civic engagement on not only our campus but on the other campus. He's already working with different departments to trying to get students engaged. He recently wants to give students the opportunity to discuss or show their emotion about what's going on. So I really think that students have a different way to engage, and he's looking for those ideas for to have students be involved in campus.
Director Huss?
I think in reading all of these applications, there are some really strong individuals. However, what really stuck out to me as someone who was working on the census 2020 is that Hemian came prepared and knew that this was essentially one of the biggest things we're going to encounter as a CSU system this year, well, as a nation this year. So I feel that I can really trust in someone who understands the largeness of that issue and already has like the background experience to take us through to the next level.
Any other discussion? All right, then we'll move on to our last candidate, Richard Barcel.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard Barcelo. I'm a fourth-year poli-sci major at Cal Poly Pomona. And yeah, I'm really nervous, but my heart's racing, kind of like when I kind of just decided to, you know what, let me do a thing with ASI. See what, wow, joking. All right, see where it goes. Anyways, okay. So as a Civic Southern Engagement Officer, first and foremost, the 2020 census, voter registration with undocumented students, AB 540, and just the political climate in general is something that has weighed heavily on not only Cal State students, but I feel just everybody. But with this focus, I wanted to just sort of address really fast that we have a lot of, we have about 800,000 students who are undocumented currently in the Cal State system. That is a huge portion of all our students. They go through huge sort of issues regarding, you know, if they can be here or not, just being a student. And so at Cal Poly, we have many multicultural centers and cultural clubs that are these branches that we intend to use and that we've been using as ways to increase voter registration for our campus alone. And so with that sort of mentality, with our unique upbringings, our unique understanding, I've been wanting to take that initiative to go to other campuses and do the same. From last month when I was here, I passed out as much information as I could. I tried to start building with Grace coalitions because I do understand that this is a collective issue. And what else? And yeah, and the plan to bridge campuses, I feel that's important. That's one of the most fundamental issues when it comes to
Thank you, that is
stuff.
time.
Thank you.
Move on to questions. Is there any questions for this candidate? All right, Director Hunter.
So with the Civic Engagement Task Force, what is the first concrete task that you want to tackle?
So with the task force, very similar to my position with Cal Poly, I am the Officer of Legislative Affairs. So just sort of being transparent, open communication with many of the bills that affect our students and the task force is sort of where I want to start. I want to begin immediately with trading all my business cards, meeting everybody, trying to get as much information as I can because this is an issue that, the southern region is huge. We need as many voices and the more voices, the better. So.
Director Wong? Oh, no longer? Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you. so all those in favor of Michael, please raise your hand. All those in favor of Panyin? All those in favor of Richard? Congratulations, Michael. So you All right, one more election left. Unfortunately, we had a board of director resign. President Brianna Archie will no longer be at CSSA. So that opened up a position at the Internal Affairs Committee. So I'm gonna open up the floor for nominations. Is there anyone interested in internal affairs? Director Rocha Zanega.
I nominate Andre.
I accept.
Any other nominations? All right, no other nominations. You ran unopposed. Congratulations. Okay, so for the sake of time, the information item for the CSSA website, I've already communicated with Chris. He said that it's okay for us to move it to September. Is there any objections for me moving that? Okay, sorry, one second. All right, okay, seeing no objection, we'll move on to the next item, which is the policy agenda. Okay, so before the board, we have the adoption of the 2019-2020 policy agenda. So we're gonna do a brief overview. We'll start with Michael, the other execs, and then we'll ask one of you to make a motion and we'll open up discussion.
Cool, thank you. So hopefully you all remember the policy agenda discussion that we had at the last plenary meeting. We are kind of running out of time, so I'm going to go over pretty briefly. The VPs will each do each of the policy priorities, but overall there were minor changes that were made to this, and keep in mind that we will be drafting our own document that will be going into effect in January. So you all did have quite a bit of input, and we do think that that is great moving forward for the new policy agenda, but was not, a lot of it probably was not included for this draft of the policy agenda because we did not have enough time within that 1 month turnaround to draft an entire agenda with all of your new policy priorities, knowing that we are going to have an entire new document that you all are going to be able to create coming in January. That's my introduction to the agenda item, and this is a great example of why you read the agenda before you come to the meeting. If you haven't yet, you're probably speed reading this, so I just want to say that real quick.
Yep, so the other thing I just wanted to say was kind of like the thought process of how the execs were thinking about including or not including certain pieces of feedback, and one of the big guiding questions that we had talked about in July was asking the question, can we still advocate for this issue without having the language explicitly included at this very moment? And so that was one of the big guiding pieces. Again, not to say that the feedback isn't legitimate, isn't valued, but to say in the development and reaffirmation of this one, could we still advocate for that issue with the language that we have now? So,
thank you for explaining that better.
Manola, can you cover your section?
So, based off of the last plenary meeting we had, my group and the people I talked to, we talked about the third policy, which is ensure the academic success and holistic educational experience of all CSU students. Looking over all the feedback that we got, everything that we that was put into it, we felt to leave this policy alone, just because we're mainly focusing on the overall education, and the word holistic seems to cover all of those needs or policies that were addressed or needs for those things. So we decided to leave that policy alone. just because, again, like we're trying to make sure we're not narrowing ourselves down into a small corner, but also making sure we're wide enough to be flexible in wherever we choose to go. So that's my policy.
Real quick, my second policy was to ensure that the CSU is accessible, affordable, and sustainable. Thank you so much for all of your input. A lot of you had really brought up the point that sustainability wasn't really mentioned or defined within this policy priority, so I made sure to include specifically the CSU 2014 sustainability policy, as well as getting in context of a lot of the student-funded facilities that continue to burden students, and then I made sure to incorporate that language within this policy priority as well, mentioning university health centers and parking structures, and also encouraging as well as encouraging for significant funding to be a collaborative and transparent budget process. There is, I know Zara will cover it later, but one of the sentences that I included and didn't finish, if you notice, just says furthermore environmental issues such as climate change, resource depletion, and waste disposal, and it doesn't finish, but the real version is going to need an amendment to include the language that states it needs to be addressed due to their time-sensitive and large impact nature. So that's just something that we're going to hopefully have to add. But other than that, if you have any questions, just let us know.
Grace, could you cover your last section?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm over here. So for mine was to enable access to housing, food, and wellness resources that promote overall student health and safety. So when we really whittled it down, this policy priority area is really about basic needs. And drawing the feedback that was given, we made proposing two changes. One is for the third paragraph. Given our diverse populations, while student services are great, we think that it is really important for those services to be culturally competent and trauma informed. So that language is an edit. The second one is in the fourth paragraph, where it says, in order to address inequities in academic success, wellness resources such as, and it lists out different resources, we are recommending that we add legal services to the basic wellness resources, as we felt as though legal services play a critical part in students' health, wellness, academic retention, and more. Yeah.
All right, we'll now need a motion so we can start discussion on the policy agenda. Is there a motion on the floor? Director Trent?
A motion to amend the policy agenda to finish that one sentence.
Okay, we're gonna work on rephrasing that. I'm gonna help you out, okay? So you can, what you wanna say is you wanna move to approve the adoption of the 2019-2020 policy agenda with the amendment that includes the statement to complete the sentence need to be addressed due to their time-sensitive and large impact nature. Is that the motion you're making?
That is the motion.
Thank you for that motion. Is there a second? Director Borges. All right, is there any discussion? Yes, Director Rocha Zuniga.
I just want to say that I really appreciate adding the legal services to priority 1 because it's very crucial and important for all students, specifically those who have been marginalized and continue to be marginalized. I just want to say thank you for that, Grace.
Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, then all those in favor of, oh, was there? Okay, Director Rivera Jimenez?
It's Padilla.
Oh, Padilla, sorry. My husband.
Okay, so then if this is the slight modifications that were done to the 2 policy agendas, does that mean that this will be officially what we're moving forward to until we look at it again in January?
Correct.
Yeah, January. Yes, January.
January is when we plan to do the final adoption, so we'll be working on it for the next couple months, but January is like the final piece.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, then we'll take this to a vote. All those in favor of adopting the 2019-2020 policy agenda by including the sentence need to be addressed due to their time sensitive and a large impact nature, please raise your hand. Okay, we're gonna do please raise your hand if you're in favor of. All right, all those against? Any abstentions? Okay, I'm gonna take a revote. I need everyone to vote. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, unanimous vote. Okay, thank you for that. Director Guthrie.
I don't know if there's like a process for this, but is there a way we could just send out the information about the overview of the executive director hiring process and move into the state audit report? Because this is a really fuzzy issue and we only have like 15 minutes left, and I want the most time to talk about a pressing issue.
So I was gonna ask the board if they weren't gonna object, if we can extend our meeting all the way to 4:10, which is right when the finance meeting starts. Is there any objection for me extending the time? All right, then we've extended the time till 4:10 by unanimous consent. Okay, we're gonna super briefly go over the overview. Michael's gonna go in about 5 minutes or less, and then we'll say if any questions or comments, you can just email him about that, and that way we have most of our time for the audit.
And, okay, I'm gonna go through this really quickly. Since we all know by this point, Rob will be leaving us. There are some pretty important aspects of this process. This is the timeline that I drafted up. This is my dream timeline. If you're in personnel committee, I talked about how much of a dream this was. So there's a lot of aspects that would influence this process and make it a little bit longer. But the process is beginning now. Jared and I will be engaging HR. We have a meeting scheduled for next week. I hope to have a special meeting with personnel committee to review the executive director position description. We'll be engaging the board between now and September plenary. My hope is to have the position posted right soon after the September plenary, either a week or two after. Once we have the position description posted, we'll be receiving applications. And then once the application period closes, the hiring committee will start reviewing the applications. We'll do the interviews, and then we have to engage CSU HR in the process as well, and hope to make the final presentation of the new executive director. At the end of that process, my dream is to have the final presentation done before January, but if we need to move it into January or into the future, that's something that we would have to do. Personnel committee will be the committee in charge of this process. So the board will be getting updates. We'll be engaging you all into what you would like to see in a new executive director. But the board does not have the most official process moving forward the way the personnel committee does. The way the Constitution states it, the board through the personnel committee has that power. Are there any questions about the process? Thank you.
And like I said, if there's any questions later you'd like to follow up, you can email Michael. Okay, then we'll finally move on to our last item, discussion item, state audit report. Our staff will be presenting for us for 10 minutes, and then we're gonna have about 15 minutes of discussion time.
Okay. Oh, I think well, okay. All right, who's ready to hear about the audit? A lot of excitement. We're gonna, Mary, Hannah, and myself are gonna present on this presentation. What we try to boil it down to are the things that we know at this stage. So you're gonna see, things from the audit as well as research that we've conducted, but then there's a number of things that we still do not know. So we're gonna try to keep it to everything that we do know at this point, as well as yield the things that we still are yet to understand, and then obviously open it up for discussion.
Would you prefer we stand in the front?
Okay, so a little overview. We're going to talk about the audit, the CSU response, what we know, what we don't know, and stakeholder interests. So if you interact with the presentation, there's a link to the actual report. So just an overview, in 2018, Assemblymember Sharon Quirk Silva requested an audit through the Joint Legislative Audit Committee to look into the CSU regarding the usage of outside accounts as well as parking services. The audit was requested by the CSU Employees Union. The audit examined the system-wide health funds as well as parking programs at the following campuses: Channel Islands, Fullerton, Sacramento State, and San Diego State.
All right, so the key findings. The surplus or reserve, depending on what you want to call it, grew by 400% and accumulated a discretionary surplus of $1.5 billion. That's the big thing you all are seeing. The Chancellor's office did not disclose this to the legislature when it was providing information about the CSU's available financial resources, and the Chancellor's office did not disclose to CSSA during state-mandated tuition increase consultation. Parking key findings. So we're going to try to speed through this really quick so we can answer as many questions, but this whole presentation is online for you all as well. So I'm not going to go over each bullet point. But the main thing, student parking fees are significantly higher and increase more frequently than those of faculty and other represented staff. CSU's response, there is also a link there. The CSU issued a formal response to the state audit on May 30th of this year. It made the following points. The surplus or reserve does an essential element of our system's fiduciary responsibilities to manage the university and ensure continued operation in the face of economic uncertainty, and thus not discretionary. The CSU is transparent by presenting each year an audited financial statement that contains the surplus or reserve presented at the September 2017 Board of Trustees meeting, an account of their surplus or reserve and the policy that guides it. And the CSU has a financial transparency portal with up-to-date information about their finances on, including the surplus reserve. The Chancellor, as well as the Chair of the Board of Trustees, have criticized the State Auditor for incorrect attacks on the CSU regarding holding a reserve and the institution's transparency. They've also agreed to all recommendations that the State Auditor has proposed. And the State Auditor then issued a response to the CSU's response, generally disagreeing with all of the points that the Chancellor outlined in his response. This response and the response to the response can be found within the audit. Parking. On each campus, students pay more for parking than any represented staff, faculty, and on most campuses more than administrators. CSSA sponsored Bill AB 532 to deal with this issue, but the bill was held in Assembly Appropriations. Tuition, and none of the 3 tuition increase proposals presented to CSSA as mandated by state law did the CSU ever mention in print or in discussion directly with CSSA leadership their reserve totals.
Hello. So when we first saw the audit, staff read through the audit, saw kind of the headline, the $1.5 billion, and knew that there were a number of kind of web-based resources that we could use to be able to look at that comparative to the audit. In addition to that, right after the audit, there were a number of op-eds that came out by the Chancellor, by the Board of Trustees, and by other advocates of the institution, essentially, arguing with the audit. And in one of those, the Santa Cruz Sentinel op-ed written by the Chancellor, he outlined a number of percentages of what the reserve or surplus does, and we took that number and then tried to compare it to. So this is a copy of the Santa Cruz Sentinel. You can click through the link and read it directly. We tried to compare it to the auditor's numbers, and it was hard comparing one to the other to find commonalities in a few places. So on short-term obligations, the auditor doesn't classify anything as a short-term obligation in the audit, and they don't. And in the Santa Cruz Sentinel op-ed, There was nothing about the operations and instruction $1.5 billion. In a number of these op-eds, they also referenced a Committee on Finance presentation in September of 2017, where at that committee, Vice Chancellor Relier, as well as, I don't know what his official title is, but Brad Wells presented both the policy on reserves and the figures from the reserves. And so we took from that presentation those numbers and then tried to compare it to the ops and to the auditor's presentation. And we found some similarities, but some differences. So the operations and instruction, there was something disclosed in that presentation that was similar, but different, obviously, by $300 million. They referenced a short-term obligation of $600 million, again, not in the auditor's report, but the capital projects number and the economic uncertainty number were significantly different. There is also a number of, again, resources online that the institution has pointed to, both in their response to the audit and at the Board of Trustees, to say, we're transparent, and if you go to these resources, you're going to find out all of this information. So one of those is a tab on the transparency portal called What is Reserves? And these are, this is a screenshot from that page. Again, you can click. And when we compare those numbers to the auditor numbers, again, we found it hard to compare the two. So operations and instructions, somewhat different. Short-term obligations, again, not listed in the auditor's report. Capital projects, significantly different. Economic uncertainty, not characterized in the financial transparency portal. The last resource that we tried to go was directly through the transparency portal. So if you click on reserves, which again, this is a screenshot from the website, and you try to compare that to at least the September 17 numbers, and use that to compare to the auditor, we try to do that as well. So again, significant differences between how the auditor was characterizing these numbers and how the institution was characterizing these numbers. And we did, after the audit was released, had a number of conversations with folks in the Chancellor's office to really ask this question: why are the numbers different? And their response was essentially that they don't know how the auditor looked at the reserve totals or how they characterized them. And so the response was essentially, the auditor's looking at it one way, potentially, and that we're looking at it in a different way. And so what we also did was look at not just what the auditor put together, but essentially everything coming directly from the Chancellor's office, because I guess at that point the assumption would be there would be some similarities between the op-ed, the What is Reserves webpage, the Board of Trustees presentation, and the financial transparency portal. And from that, we also found that it was hard to compare the numbers. We know that we can't compare the numbers at this point, but we're not really sure why. So, again, I think we've heard a number of times that this information is readily available, and the information is readily available, but it is hard to compare to one another, and so I guess that leaves us with really what we don't know, which is it's hard to know what the surplus and reserve totals actually are. I mean, again, when you compare even just what are reserves, which is on the same web page as the CSU Financial Transparency Portal, you see not insignificant differences. The numbers track similarly, but there is some difference there. In addition to that, there are a number of other things that we don't know. What is it used for specifically? Is there a guiding principle on how the reserves can be used system-wide, or is there some difference between how the campuses can utilize their reserves? The audit really tied tuition to the reserve totals or surplus totals, and the other question that we have is how is tuition really connected to the reserve? Is tuition utilized to fill the reserve, and if so, how is it done? On alternative modes of transportation, that was a part of the parking portion of the audit. A big portion of the audit said that a number of campuses have not pursued these alternative modes of transportation. But I guess the other question that we would have is this even of benefit to students, particularly students who can't avail themselves of those alternative modes of transportation? If you're a student who drives to campus and really has no other option, is this a benefit, right? And that question, in a general sense, we really don't know the answer to. The institution has really characterized the auditor as biased and politically motivated. You know, we don't know that. We know that the institution is saying that, but it's hard to know if that is true or not. And if it is true, we don't know that. We know that the institution is saying that. And then lastly, how are legislators going to approach the CSU? So as you all are aware, there will be a joint committee hearing on Monday where 4 committees will combine, like Megatron, I guess, to ask the institution as well as the auditor, as well as CSSA, a number of questions about this audit. But after that, it's hard to know, will this impact the way that the legislature and the governor see CSU funding for this upcoming year? As well as, are they going to legislate anything, and will this impact the bond that the institution is pushing forward? The last thing is, how are CSU stakeholders engaging with this audit as well? Obviously, we know that the Chancellor's office is disputing the audit while accepting all of the recommendations. We know this, the employees union requested the audit, and maybe potentially because of that request of the audit, there's going to be some nexus between that and legislation trying to increase compensation for their membership. We haven't really seen anything from CFA yet on how they're approaching the audit. And then obviously for us, we do not have an official position on this, and I think essentially this is what opens up the conversation about the audit.
Thank you. If none of you object, I spoke to Michelle. Would it be okay if I extend the meeting for 5 more minutes so you have 15 minutes of discussion? Any objections? None? Great. Okay. Our meeting will end at 4:15. So let's start discussion. Director 1.
So the 1.5 billion, was that the actual reserves, or they're still trying to figure out based on the Chancellor's office and the auditors?
Well, yeah, as you know, the audit alleges a $1.5 billion surplus. At no point in any of the CSU's disclosed information do we see a $1.5 billion surplus of reserve, and so, you know, I would say we're hearing one thing from the institution. I mean, not one thing, maybe 4 things from the institution, and then 1 thing from the auditor. So I would say we don't know.
So please keep your hand raised up high if you want to be called on, so I can get a list down. And if I point at you, that means I have your name down on the list.
Yes, Director Ruiz.
I have a couple of different questions, but so I guess specifically to Channel Islands, I know I think it was the Sacramento Bee who put out the one that said that like Channel Islands built like a whole new parking structure, which like isn't true. Like there's no parking structure. So like I don't know if like where that kind of information came out of, or like what constitutes a parking structure.
If it was just in the SAC B, then I wouldn't worry about it. No offense to the SAC B, but anywhere from there. But newspapers get things wrong. So I wouldn't worry too much about that because I don't remember seeing that in the actual audit.
Yeah. I think from the audit, we saw that that was alleged to have happened at San Diego State.
And then my other question is, when we kind of had a conversation about it at Channel Islands with our like executive director and our pro staff, they said that like the 1.5 billion is like taken from different amounts from like the 23 total CSUs. Is that true, or like where does this 1.5 or whatever number it is, since we don't know, like where does it exist, and like does it come from different campuses, or is it just like a grand total sitting somewhere?
So typically system-wide funds are divided proportionally amongst the campuses. So if the auditor is alleging a $1.5 billion surplus, again, not exactly the same number as the institution, you would assume that that reserve is held proportionally by the 23 campuses. Again, that is speculation based on other ways that the institution manages their funds, but that would be our theory at this point, and again, something that we don't know for sure.
Just to clarify that one, each campus does have a different allocation that they plan for of reserves. So technically what your staff told you was correct in the way that each campus decides what is in their budget is going to be set aside for reserves. And yes, that kind of can contribute to the system-wide number of reserves. That's just a portion of it though.
Director Huss.
Okay, so my question is, when you were doing this research contact 4 universities affected by this audit and see if what happened on their campuses with the audits aligned with what was put within the audit itself.
I'll turn it over to Grace.
So, upon our recent meetings with the Vice Chancellor of Finance, we learned that for those 4 campuses that were audited for the parking, that the recommendations are going to be led by transportation kind of committees on that campus. And so I've connected with Fullerton, but for the rest of the campuses, I look forward to doing that just because we just had that meeting maybe like 2 days ago. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, I was more so like looking for like what those campuses' experiences were with the audit. Our campus had a interesting experience, I guess, in which they provided them with a list of like alternative transportation things that we addressed, but it was kind of like they gave a list but didn't explain what it does and how much we're spending for it. So I was just curious what the experience was for the other 3 campuses involved in this audit.
And that's a gap in information that it's good that we've identified and we'll follow up. Thanks.
Director Tinoco?
If we could go back to the slide of what we don't know, there's a list on there. Is CSSA, the legislative staff, are you guys currently working on finding out the answers to these questions? And then I guess once we find out the answers, if that's what the next steps are, is that how we're going to kind of put out a statement how CSSA or how this board feels about it? Is that kind of what the next steps are?
Yeah, so I think we've really been waiting for this audit hearing in which Grace is able to ask questions like this of the Chancellor and Auditor while they both are there. I would also say that we're not the only ones with these questions, and there are going to be 40 members questioning the Auditor and the Chancellor's office in 2 days. So a lot of these questions we're hoping will be answered. If they're not at the audit, then we of course will be following up and making sure that we have answers to these questions.
Yeah, and then I would add, you know, we've had a number of opportunities at this point to talk to the Chancellor's office. I think that we still want to engage on these questions. We've also reached out to the auditor directly to see if we could set a time to ask them similar questions. It does seem as if we're getting to a stage where it's kind of they say sort of. And so we're, you know, after a JLAC committee hearing, trying to assess how can we kind of move forward and gain unbiased information that really gets us to the answers to these questions.
Thank you.
Director Juan?
So I was talking to our president in our university trying to figure out the current situation. She mentioned to me that the CSU system needs to have a certain amount of money in their rainy day funds. And I think it was supposed to help the CSU's function for 5 months. How much specifically does the CSU need to have in reserves to be fully functional for 5 months, just in case any calamity happens?
We can follow up and give you specifics to that. Our understanding is that this reserve total represents approximately 2 months of reserve for each of the campuses, and that NACUBO, which represents the National Association of College University Business Officers, that they recommend a 5-month reserve held by universities, and that the institution is seeking to grow the reserve to be able to meet that 5 months. But again, we can confirm specifically, but at this point, our working understanding is it represents about a 2-month reserve for each of the campuses.
The total number should be in the auditor's report of what a 5-month reserve would look like. Director Guthrie?
Yeah, when was that 40% questioning thing happening and where?
JLAC committee, yeah, so that's Monday. We don't know, it's not time certain. Correct, yeah. So we will on social media make sure that once the committee starts, that we will post that. Obviously, everybody will be here at CS Unity, and it can be at any point during the day. It's upon adjournment of the legislative floor session. So we'll link that on social media, and then those videos will be held on the website so that everybody can watch afterwards as well.
So assembly floor session has to start by 1 p.m. on Monday, which means that the audit can't start before 1 p.m. So it's going to have to be after that. It could be 1:15, it could be 3 starts, and Grace is going to put a message in the group me that you all have access to. So watch out for that. Just go to the Assembly webpage and at any point during the day, and on there, if the audit is going on, you'll see a link on the right-hand side.
Any other questions? All right. Then, questions, statements, anything else? All right. Okay, seeing none, I adjourn this meeting at 4:09 p.m. But if you're in finance, please sit because your meeting starts in exactly 1 minute.
If you were elected as special officer, if you could just meet me in the hallway by the CSSA table so we can grab a quick photo. Thank you.
Will members of the Finance Committee please make their way to